I'm going to talk about hardware. I'm going to talk about it from a perspective of software developer. And I am going to kind of see if we can go through, and maybe talk just a little bit about, it's going to be a lot of this, so get used to it. Talk just a little bit about how do you actually get in to start doing a little bit of hardware stuff. So how many people here have played with like a microprocessor, like an Arduino or those kind of things, right? And it's one of those things where I've always wanted to, but I was kind of, I'm not quite sure. I come from a software background. I say software loosely. I dabble. I'm not, shipping things every day. I tend to write a lot more than I do sometimes even code these days. Here's a sample of something I wrote about what it would be like to actually work with a ninja. Hey, everyone gets those LinkedIn things, right? They're like, hey, are you a JS ninja? Are you a rock star? It's like, imagine if you had to actually work with a ninja. Like, it would not be fun. So I find myself doing quite a bit of this. And yeah, it's uncanny likeliness, I know. I code like that too. Always shocked when it works. And I've always been really interested in just microcontrollers and also just not knowing shit about them. And so, I found myself a couple years ago. It feels like every couple years I go back to them. I play with them a little bit and then I leave them, and then I play with them a little bit and I leave them. And sometimes, I have a brother who's really handy, so sometimes we play with RC, and sometimes we're doing like building robots and all sorts of stuff. And he's way more like, apt towards that kind of stuff than I am. And so a couple years back, I was working at a company called Big Spaceship, and, digital agency, right? Typical digital agency of this time. Everyone wants to be doing something new and something different, and something new and something different. A lot of times these days are connected devices, right? Like we've all heard the douchey term of like Internet of Things, right? Everything's connected. Like it's, oh my God, it's this big phrase. It's going to revolutionize or innovate or whatever. But it's, it's pretty simple. Like things are just getting connected. And so, when I worked there, I said, I'm kind of bored. Frankly, I'm bored. And front end's exciting, fine. I've learned a lot. And back end, yeah, okay, I can do Ruby or Python or any of that kind of stuff, fine. But I'm bored, and I want to explore something I'm not, I'm not as comfortable with. And they're like, okay, sure. Like, what do you need? What should we do? And like every other company at that time, they started building out like an innovation lab, right? Like as if they put you into a room and they call it the innovation room or the R&D lab, that you're suddenly going to be this innovator, and like that's where innovation happens. And so, I was like, okay, fine. I would love to be able to work on this one day a week and figure out some stuff. And they're like, okay, well, what are you going to work on? Like, what's our ROI on this? Like, stab me in the face. And I'm like, I don't know. You're just, I don't know what you're going to get. You might get nothing, So you can say that internally. You can't really say that to a client. So, I took a course at a place called Pioneer Works over in Brooklyn, and I met a person who really knows deep electronics and doesn't really know software. And his name was Dave Scheinkoff. And he was like, you know software, I don't. I know hardware, you don't. We need to start working together, because I really want to learn software. You really want to learn hardware. So this is a room that Big Spaceship gave me. It's about the size of this. It had no windows. And when I started to put stuff into the room, I brought my own stuff. And then I started to look around the agency, and I noticed they had Arduinos. They had a MakerBot. They had, there was these, little things that they had that no one was playing with. So we just brought them all together, and we started to kind of figure out these things. And, I started spending full-day Thursdays just learning basic, how to do circuits, learning the difference between, microprocessors, figuring out, Raspberry Pi came out, how do you use it? And, the only reason this worked at the agency was because I promised the CEO that I would never tell him the idea or what I was working on. He didn't want to know. Just show me the end product. Because if he knew at the beginning the stuff that I would pitch him, he'd just be like, no, you can't do that. So that's the only way it kind of worked. And I started to really like fall in love with that kind of stuff. And you know, these phrases are like, do what you love and the rest will come. They're complete bullshit most of the time. That's, you know, usually someone who's from like a place of privilege, who's highly successful, who's like, do what you love, look what happens. And I tend to do this when I see that. And then I think, yeah, I love this one, do what you love, tomorrow will pay the bills. And I'm like, I can't wait to meet tomorrow. Because if I was to do what I love, it wouldn't necessarily be Arduino, it wouldn't necessarily be software. I'd be sitting on a couch, I'd be yelling at Master Chef while eating a pizza. Okay, if I can get paid for that, my friends, we have it all made. So when I see these things, there is a speck of truth in them a little bit, because as we'll go through and I'll show you some projects I've worked on, I can actually talk about, you know what, this actually gave me a side job, this actually did something. But usually when I see that, this is my only reaction, right? So you start coming into electronics, and we're so used to web front ends, we're used to deploying, we might know Grunt or Gulp, or we might know like CSS preprocessors, you might come from like a native application background, you're very familiar with this stuff. And suddenly you see this, and you're like, what? Right? And then, so you're like, okay, maybe that's complex. Maybe I'll just look for some other kind of diagram. So you're like, okay, now, you know, what's this? Whoops, sorry. I don't know. Like, I'm so confused. And then you realize, oh, it says basic power circuit, like highlighted. And then you're like, okay, basic what? Oh, friends. You know, so you start getting into these things and you're very uncomfortable. And you think, what is the worst that can happen? Like for me, it's a lot about like, it's not just about, I don't know, there's something about code and like starting up a VM and just, you know, installing a bunch of crap and maybe it's gonna work and maybe it's not. You just kind of start over and whatever. You know, there's that little playground that you can kind of play with a little bit. And with electronics, I was afraid I was gonna get electrocuted. I was afraid I was going to set something on fire. This is my worst fear, right? And, yeah, poor guy. And coming from, you know, a software perspective, my friend Dave was afraid that he could erase his whole entire drive. Like, he had just gotten a Raspberry Pi, and he said, Stacey, I didn't get the pre-configured SD card. I need to put it on, and I sent him a tutorial. I said, it's really easy. You just need to do these steps. And then he saw in the tutorial was like, oh, you might erase your hard drive if you don't select the right one. And so he had this moment, he said, for 10 minutes, where his biggest fear was like, oh shit, like I might erase my hard drive. Like, what do I do here? You know, and so we started to realize that like hardware-wise, I was a little bit scared of some things, and software-wise, he was really scared of a lot of things. And that kind of keeps you from delving a little bit, right? But we both realized that no matter what, we're not going to be these guys. Right? So, again, we spent some time back in this little shop, which was my shop. Dave had his own entire crazy setup, but I had enough to kind of go on, and we started to collaborate a little bit. And every time we collaborated, he would start with electronics, I'd start with the software, and then now we've interchanged roles. And it's gotten to the point where I'm comfortable enough with certain things that we can kind of change roles, and depending on the project that we're working on, you know, I'll start actually doing the electronics, and he'll start with the software, and he kind of learns those kind of things. So I'm going to walk through a couple of collaborations that we've done, just to kind of show you. I would love to have demoed them, but some of these things, they're a little intense. So one of the things we did, we called Booty Bump, and I'm up for a better name if you have a better name for it. But how many of you in here are developers, right? And you know, you have that moment, and it's kind of like, okay, you write something, error, you write something, another error, you write something, it creates a new error, then you start going through the stack trace and everything else, and you know, you realize that no matter what you're doing, you're just going to error out, and you know, you're not this guy, because apparently this guy's just got it all set up. But you have that moment where you write 50 lines of code, and magically it works. Right? Have we all had this moment? Right? And it's just like 50 lines of code, you didn't stop, nothing magically works. And you're immediately like this. Like, no frickin' way, right? And then you're like, oh my God, it's magic. It's magic, don't touch it, I don't know. And you're like, holy shit, I did that. I need to go high five someone. Like, this is amazing. And so you have this moment and you go to high five someone and you talk to the designer beside you, and the designer doesn't care. The designer's like, big deal, isn't that your job? Right? And so you're like, okay, I need to celebrate somehow. I'm going to get up, I'm going to dance, and I'm going to do whatever because this is an amazing feat. And I don't know if that feeling is something just particular to developers. I feel like designers probably have those moments where they lay something out or they solve a complex problem, because really it doesn't matter if you're a designer or a developer, you're just solving a problem. But that moment when you solve the problem and it's just immediate, I don't know if they have the same feeling as developers, because I know for me, as soon as I do that, like, I'm off on the Twitters, like, I'm a golden god, like, this is amazing. So we wanted to build something that could kind of celebrate that moment, and it could let other people know that you did something awesome, and that you didn't really expect anything from them except for maybe like a nod, like, yeah, what's up, yeah, good for you, like just a like kind of thing. So we built something called Booty Bump. And once again, this is like one of the first projects I worked on. I pitched it to the CEO. I said, I'd really love to build this and install it into the shop. And he's like, please don't tell me these things. Don't tell me. He's like, I can't conceptualize it. I can't understand it. And so basically what Booty Bump ended up being, it was an installation where you had two sensors. And the idea was if you did something awesome, you just go up and you booty bump it. And if both your butt cheeks, so if you had one butt cheek bigger than the other, you might be in trouble. I don't know how that would work. But both butt cheeks, if you hit it, you bump it, and it would play a light show in like 8 seconds of a song that was associated to you, for example. So you had that 8 seconds of glory, you know, where you're in the spotlight. And so we started to build this out, and we had like 2 spotlights. We did like relays on them. We used Raspberry Pi. We had no idea how to use Raspberry Pi. And real simple, just 2 sensors, 2 kind of lights, and played music. And so we tested it out, and we had a prototype, and we printed out Homer Simpson holding 2 donuts. We figured 2 donuts was equivalent to a butt. And this is Dave kind of testing it out.
We did it.
Like, this is what he thinks a developer would do. I'm not quite sure.
It's so ridiculous.
And you can hear my laughter because I couldn't contain myself. Like, it was just this ridiculous kind of thing. Yeah. And, you know, we quickly prototyped this in a couple of hours and realized, well, we'll put those sensors somewhere else. You know, we'll configure this. Oh, he looks so happy. It's so weird. Him in his Cosby sweater. And then I ran home. I got a pair of my actual jeans. And we're like, yeah, we wanted to get a mannequin, but we couldn't. So we're like, how can we like mold my frame? So we did chicken wire all around me. It was the most awkward day of my life. Like, it's just, there's nothing right about it. We did chicken wire around me and then made a form, which just really kind of looked like a big square. Apparently I have a square. And then we filled it with like foam, the spray foam, to kind of make that shape. And apparently that's what I look like. So we did all that, and we installed it, and we just wanted to have something. Once again, this like is not a pretty thing. This is the idea of how fast can we do this to sell the idea to someone else so that we can get the proper materials to actually build it. And we installed this at the shop, and it lasted for about 3 days. Until everyone was like, okay, that's really awesome, but it's also really annoying. So we can't have that in the shop anymore because everyone all day long was just going by and they were bumping it. And to me, that's kind of a sign of success, right? Like, you know, if people are going to be using it all the time, then that's what it is. And so something like this, for example, we kind of posted about it, and then we had a company that I knew, a former coworker at New York, and they said, hey, I've got a mannequin for you. How about you come and build this and install it? We'll pay you guys, et cetera, et cetera. Next thing we know, we had like a working job out of it. You know, something really simple. So, you know, we started to like just work on these things. And once again, the stuff that I like to build, it's not useful, right? Like in its original idea. And I'm the first one to admit that. How many people have sat through a lot of UX talks lately? Right? And it's all about, the user and as quick as they can do it, and it's got to be super useful and utility. Oh, screw that. Sometimes you just want to play, and I think that if you don't add a little bit of play to what you're doing, then you're never ever going to find that utility, right? Like, I think there's got to be a little bit of a balance, and so for me, I like to look at things in terms of delight a little bit, and I hate that word delight because people are saying that a lot, like, you need to delight the user, but I like to be pleasantly surprised, and I like to build stuff that's probably useless and then maybe uses technology in a way that you can apply to something else. And so this is another thing we worked on. We call it the Grid-A controller, or cat troller. So little known fact, I might have been a cat lady. Yeah. Okay, it gets worse. I had 2 cats. They were named Rudy and Theo, because I thought, oh, Huxtable's awesome, which opens me up to more cats, because there's more names to fill. Like, worst mistake in my life. So I had 2 cats at one point, a bit of a cat lady, and when we were talking about this project, the biggest goal for us is if we built something that could be a product that could be in Sky Mall, that's a serious success, right? Like, seriously. Like, if I had something in Sky Mall, I'd be like, yeah, because Sky Mall is awesome. I mean, everything in Sky Mall kind of solves a problem you didn't know you had, right? And so I love this kind of quote about, like, it gives you the, essential secret of American consumer life, Like, it is. It's the Sky Mall is like the Container Store. You walk in, and suddenly there's solutions to problems that you had no idea you had, and now you have them, right? So Sky Mall, I mean, there's a lot of things in Sky Mall. There's, like, comfort, there's style, making new friends, quality of life. This is a good one. I actually wanted to buy this. Study time, in case you're really lazy. This would be me watching The Biggest Loser while eating a pizza. Stuff for business, the all-in-one solution. And for someone like me, or other people in this room who I know have fur babies, they have lots of solution for fur babies. And so when we started to think about this project, just to set you up a little bit, we knew our demographic really, really well. We knew who this would be for. And it was very specific, and it's definitely for this lady, who could or could not be me, who has a bunch of cats. And when you think about, I'm okay making fun of the cat lady stereotype, or cat guy stereotype, if that's your thing too, it doesn't really matter. Cat person. But cats are interesting, and when you think about them and then the people who kind of own them, you always think, oh, how cute is that? That cat's just kind of laying and sleeping there while I'm sleeping. Nah, it's kind of just checking your breath to see that if you're dead so it can eat your face, right? And then when you're this cat person, you start doing things like this, where you're like, okay, I'm going to start shaming my cats because they're kind of my children. And then, you have so many cats that you start to feel like you're giving more attention to one cat than the other, and then you have a guilty complex. And then one day you kind of screw up. Maybe you don't buy the right cat food, and the next thing you know, you come home and your cat is on your computer because you did not log out of Facebook. And it's sitting there on Facebook and it's posting all sorts of stuff, right? And then you're like, okay, fine. And you walk in, and then you see this, and you're like, okay, and the cat's like, do you live in a barn? You should knock. And this is who that persona kind of is. You go in your kitchen, and the next thing you know, it's the worst roommate ever. You fall, and the next thing you see is only this. And they're not going to dial for you to get up, right? So we kind of thought about, like, okay, cats are awesome, and they're fun to make, there's a lot of fun things we can do around them. What can we do? So we called it the Grid-A Kitty cat controller, and basically what we wanted to do is we wanted to take a cat, a stuffed cat, maybe a plush cat, whatever, not a real cat. No real cats were harmed in this, don't worry. And we wanted to kind of be able to pet it, and petting it do something, and then tapping it or patting it do something. And that would control something else. So I was like, well, that's easy. Let's just go to Instagram. Let's just go take some pictures that are tagged like Kid-A, which, by the way, is a weird tag. You get a lot of weird things. I don't necessarily always recommend it. And And let's just have, if you pet the cat, it scrolls through the pictures, and if you tap it, it's going to download it to, whatever you want to download it to, your Drive, to Dropbox, whatever. So it's like the ultimate thing for a cat lady or a cat man, because they can just scroll through pictures all day and save them. Like, I actually use this for gifts, to be honest, because I'm like, yeah, so good, right? So we're like, okay, let's look for a stuffed cat. And there was these really weird things that happened, I think, in the 80s, maybe 70s or 80s, where they started to make like cat figurines out of real hair. Not real cat hair, which is kind of weird, real rabbit hair. So they're going to kill 18 rabbits to make this little cat figurine. I don't really understand it, but there's this whole thing behind them. And they look pretty realistic, and they're almost kind of like taxidermy. Like, some of them are a little freaky, and we started looking at these. It reminded us a little bit of that bad taxidermy site. And then, there's these ones that are kind of like they're sleeping. We're like, that's so cute. It'd be so awesome. And then we started to like mock it up, like Sky Mall. Like, how would you do this in Sky Mall? Oh, you'd just be sitting and the cat would be on your thing. Or you could be, sleeping against the airplane seat and, the cat's up here. And we started like sending these images back and forth. And finally, we ended up buying one of these little cats, and we had no idea. I thought it was going to be about this big, right? Like, I was like, awesome, this is going to be so creepy. And it ends up being really tiny, about the size of a mouse. So we're like, perfect, because when you think about it, the interactions we're trying to impose on this is going to be that of a mouse, right? Scroll, click, scroll, click. So we're like, okay, we're replacing a mouse, fundamentally. And so we added in some, conductive thread, and we kind of did like a whole staircase along the side so we could see like how fast you scrolled and scrolling. We carved out the inside of it, and we used a teensy. This is what it looks like. That's its innards. And of course, we needed LEDs for the eyes. Once we got to the LEDs, that's where it became really creepy. Like, hold on, I'll play it again. It's like, when it downloads, it actually does this like thing, and you're just like, oh my God, it's going to eat my face, right? And so, we started playing with these things, and normally when we're working on these things, there's a software and there's a hardware component, and then at some point they kind of meet, right? You kind of integrate them. And so, we're able to kind of go and just say, yeah, this works fine. Okay, this works fine. Now, how do we bring them together? And I think this is also... So this is it. So this is it, just basically scrolling through images. I mean, nothing crazy. And once you tap it, which I don't know if we have, I might have the next one, might be a tap. Right? And really simple, and all of a sudden, the next thing I know in my Dropbox, I have a gazillion cat images, right? And so, the beauty about this was I'm used to dealing with specific languages, but all of a sudden I was learning processing. I was learning a Node backend, for example, which I might have done before, but I was learning new kind of pieces of software to make stuff work. And that's what I really love about this kind of work is you start just delving into things that you might not know the practical application for, but you can use. And you start exposing yourself to a whole bunch of things. And the one thing that we used for this was Space Brew. How many people have heard of Space Brew? Oh, see, if you learn nothing from the session, Space Brew is an amazing, amazing thing. So Space Brew is basically WebSockets running on Node. And their tagline, if you look up Space Brew, is like something like creating connected spaces, right? And so basically anything that can connect to WebSockets, so you're looking at Python, PHP, Node, Java, like any of that stuff that you want to do, Objective-C, etc. You can connect to Space Brew. And what Space Brew does, you start up the server basically, and you have in Space Brew you have things that are considered. What's the best way to put it? You have things that are considered clients, and clients connect, right? And so, for example, you might have a processing sketch that connects, and then a JavaScript page or Node app or something that connects. That's a client. a client can subscribe or publish messages. So they can listen for stuff or they can publish, right? And they can do both at the same time. And they can also send and, multiple. So the beauty about Space Brew is that they give you this admin, and what you do is you say, okay, as long as you have what they're going to listen to and publish or subscribe, you just hook them up. You just click, 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 and next thing you know, you're getting messages through, right? Which is really beautiful. Now, Space Brew is limited in terms of the data that it can send. It can send 3 types of data. A string, you can do a lot with the string, so, don't let that stop you. A range, so numbers like 0 to 255, and then a Boolean. And so what we did here for that little thing is we had a teensy, which a teensy is about this big, costs about $20, and a little microcontroller, just like Arduino. The beauty of teensy over Arduino is that Arduino is about this big, and you might prototype on an Arduino, and then if you want to put it into production and put it in an installation, you might use a teensy. It's a little bit smaller, a little bit more, easy to hide. You also have to solder all the connections to a teensy, so you kind of want to leave it until you've got something working. So in that, we had a teensy because it would fit inside of it, and it was connected to processing, and then processing has a library for Space Brew, and you just connect up, and then in Node, they also have a library for Space Brew. And so that was a Node Express app, and basically you connect through Space Brew, you'd send messages like I'm scrolling, so it was just a slider, scroll a slider, or I want to download it, and it would send that message and just run, one of the routes on the Express app, and send it up to your Dropbox API, for example. So Space Brew I've been using pretty much all the time now because I find it so easy, and it's amazing all the different things that you can use it in. So another thing we worked on, and this also uses Space Brew, is something called haptic hoot, for lack of a better name. And in my job day to day, I have to touch a gazillion technologies. So I might be working in Python, JavaScript, C#, and something else in a day. And sometimes that gets a little confusing. But in some ways, it's really great. And so, I was, a couple months ago in my job, I was told, learn Unity. I was like, okay, cool. I'm a Flash developer. I used to be. Sorry. I'm okay with saying it. You should be okay with it, too. Woo! And Unity is the IDE was different, but very familiar. Concepts were very familiar. I suddenly started to, I really grokked it very quick. And so, I was like, okay, so I built this little game in Unity, just, took about a day, and it was just a Simon game, and I added animations, and I thought I'll just build something for kids. And it's just like a bunch of owls that you would play a sequence, and then you play it back, nothing crazy. It takes you an hour, maybe at the most, to write the logic for it, more like probably 15 minutes. But, spent some time just kind of wrapping it together. Then I was like, what can I do with this that's a little bit more interesting? Because what I like about physical things versus digital things is that digital, you kind of put it out there and you hope that people connect with it. Physical, you just see a whole different side of people. And you see that immediate reaction to it, whether they understand or don't, whether they're delighted or not. And so I always feel like adding a physical part when you can, maybe if it's not dependent on it, but as an add-in would be great. So for this game, I built a basic DDR pad. I was like, yeah, I love DDR. DDR is awesome. I suck at it, but, whatever. So I found this material on Adafruit, and it cost $4. It's called Velostat. Looks like a garbage bag. You get it, and you're just like, what is this stuff? It's about this big. And keep in mind those pressure sensors that we, normally you'd want to use, they cost about $10, anywhere from $8 to $10 a piece. So you'd need to, that's $40, whereas this is $4. And what you do with it is if you line it with conductive thread, you can get a signal back from it. And you don't need a lot of fidelity here. You just need to know if it's on or off. You don't really care about the pressure. You're not weighing anyone. It's just on or off. So we built some pads and just wired up some conductive thread and read them through an analog pins. And next thing you know, once again, this was about an hour. And the next thing you know, boom, we're getting all these signals back. We know if it's on or off. We can calibrate them. And again, we were just running it through Teensy, so it was something we were going to want to hide. And we fired in some NeoPixels which, by the way, if you haven't played with NeoPixels, NeoPixels work with Arduinos. They don't work with Raspberry Pi, just throwing it out there. But if you work with NeoPixels, they have a library. It's dead easy. Like, it's so easy to create all those kind of LED effects. So we had this, like, you know, if you pressed on it, it would light up. And we built this separate from everything else. This is our really bad board that we shipped all the way, or we brought all the way to Brighton and didn't make it back. And I think this might be a video. So, you know, we just started like, okay, does this work? Fine. You know, next thing, like, can we color coordinate them? You know, like, eventually this will be packaged in a way that makes sense and is quite beautiful, but for now, it just does what it needs to do. And, you know, this is it, just working in Brighton. Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe my foot's just stuck there. Right? Nothing crazy. But then, you know, you need to kind of hook it up, right? So how do you hook it up to something? And lo and behold, this is a game I made in Unity. It's not that pretty. I'm not an illustrator, but I try. And they would just play these sequences. So, you know, let's see if it actually runs. I don't know. I think it's a bad. Like, woo, that's all it is, right? Like, I'm not proclaiming to be anything great. But what would happen is now that we, you know, tapped into SpaceBrew has a prefab, that's what they call it in Unity, basically like a little library you drag and drop in Unity, and you honestly just fill in some fields. Where's your server at? What are you listening for? What are you sending? You write a little bit of code, which has anyone played in Unity here? Yeah, has anyone written C# in here? Oh, C#, beautiful language. And it's like dead easy to get up and running. It took 10 minutes in Unity. And, you know, basically Unity would just send a message over to the pad saying, processing sketch saying, hey, you know, like this item's being fired, light up that pad. And then it'd be like, hey, it's a user's turn, play a sequence on the NeoPixels. And so, once again, pretty simple to get up and running. But again, I found myself in Unity, which is another piece of software that maybe a couple months before I never would have explored. So, you know, you're starting to see a little bit of those kind of things that are going on, and trying to figure out where the problem is and how you need to solve it. I'll throw out the idea that I'm working on now and I'm trying to finish for Sunday, which I'm enlisting help. I think Val's in the room, and I was like, Val, you know Ableton. So everyone knows this guy, right? Skrillex. And, you know, I thought, oh, that kind of looks like Skrillex a little. And if I had those, well, that even looks more like Skrillex. What if I had a T-Rex? So what if I combined Skrillex and a T-Rex puppet and a bendy sensor, and I created some puppet-making dubstep, right? And so, you know, that was pretty much my next project is, once again, what is it going to do? I really don't know, or how it's going to end up. But I think the beauty about working with some of the hardware stuff, even the little projects I've shown, which aren't mind-blowing, I'm not going to pretend that it's like I'm some installation artist or anything. But I think the beauty is that it's encouraged me to learn more software. Like, I have touched more software in the last 6 months and all over the place than I ever have before. And for anyone who has had to get out of their comfort zone and had to maybe try something else that they weren't sure of, it's a really crazy, like, rewarding feeling, right? Like, if you've never set up a server and you did it and it works and you hit the page and Apache's running, like, it's like, yeah, that's amazing, whatever it may be. So the beauty about hardware is that even though it encouraged me to learn a lot of stuff that I wasn't comfortable with to begin with, hardware-wise, I learned way more software. Like, right now I can talk about a variety of languages, you know, with respectable knowledge, right? And so it got me back to programming. And the interesting thing about that is that for a while I was burnt out on programming. I didn't want to do it. And so just by playing out on these little things again and bringing it back in, it kind of brought me back to that. And so when it comes to hardware and software, they have a lot in common. And if you have a microcontroller, someone I sat beside yesterday at dinner said, I have like 2 Arduinos, they're just sitting at home gathering dust. Well, you know, just give yourself a project, and it doesn't have to be massive, it doesn't have to change the world. Just give yourself something that you think is interesting or funny, and start. And when you start with hardware, it's a lot like software. Like, you have to be thorough, you have to be systematic. Write down all the steps that you're doing and take pictures, because if you ever have to take that circuit out and reuse your breadboard or something else for something else, you want to kind of automatically remember what you did to make it work. You know, buy extra things. Like, has anyone burnt out an Arduino here? Please don't tell me I'm the only one. Yeah, I've done it on everything. I'm like, oh shit, that happened. Like, you like touch your Arduino, it's hot. You're like, I don't think that's a good sign, right? But you just gotta, you know, buy a couple extras. Stuff is relatively cheap. Adafruit, SparkFun, DigiKey, you know, Mouser, all those things. Like, they're fairly cheap. Buy a couple extra. If you're gonna, don't buy one LED, buy a package. You're gonna burn out an LED. It's gonna happen. You know, but write it down, document with a camera, ask some questions, and reverse engineering is always a really good start. Like, if you have something that works in your house, or like an old school, you know, some kind of electronics component, take it apart. That's kind of how I grew up. I grew up with a brother who took everything apart, and I watched him. Like, oh, cool, you know, and he would take apart everything, and it's a really good way to start. So I guess how to get started, take a class, right? Look at Skillshare, look at the maker spaces. The Arduino community, the maker community is an interesting community. In some ways they're super open, and in some ways they're super closed. So, you know, when you go to Stack Overflow, or you go and you ask a question and you kind of get a little bit like, maybe it's a dumb question, and someone just slams you a little, and you're like, okay, I deserve that. So if you've ever had to go to iOS, it's even worse. And if you've ever had to go to Arduino, it's even worse. Like, they're not the most friendliest on the forums, but in person, those people are perfectly amazing and lovely, and they just want to help you. So take a class, drop 100 on a kit, right? Buy stuff in multiples. Like, it's fairly cheap. There's lots of web tutorials. So depending on what processor or microprocessor you're going to use, there's tons of stuff on Raspberry Pi right now, because Raspberry Pi is more than just a microprocessor, right? It's running a Linux machine. But, you know, there's tons of stuff. The other thing, if you're going to Google anything, if you're going to Bing anything, I have to, and I did it. If you're going to, you know, search for anything, the first result is not always what you're looking for. Actually go and read a couple of them, and then figure out which one you think is the best for you, because people will give you like a couple steps, half steps, no steps, and you gotta, it's not like the first result's not always the best. These people want to collaborate, find out a meetup group. Like, these people who know hardcore electronics, they don't know software, and you can lend them something. So, you know, figuring out those kind of people, take on a project, just build something from start to finish. You know, it's, you're building something for your bike, build it start to finish, right? You're running something at home, and you're just gonna make a little, you know, screen that shows your tweets and scroll them through, whatever. Start it and finish it, and try to do as much as you can, just all in one thing. Treat it like as if most people treat writing. They sit down and they just go until like they feel like they've gotten as much as they can on the page. You need to do that with hardware. And, you know, just getting started, there's a bunch of stuff out there. I just got an Intel Galileo, which I'm excited to play with. Once again, all these things range anywhere from $20 to $100. There's Teensies. Teensies, get a Teensy 3 or higher. They're about $19, maybe $21. The difference is that you have to have some skills in terms of being able or comfortable to solder stuff. You can have Arduino Uno is a really good way to just start. It's $30, I think, or $25, $30. There's variations of Arduinos. There's like, they have the new, I think it's Young now, that's basically Linux and Wi-Fi enabled. Raspberry Pi, the new one has a bunch of USB ports. Thank you, Raspberry Pi. You have, has anyone heard of Spark? Do yourself a favor. Amazing, amazing company, best customer service, $40, Wi-Fi enabled. All the data they kind of expose in a REST API. So if you click a button, they're basically storing that data, so you can use a REST API and a bunch of stuff. Just an amazing company, $40, you can't beat it. So that's basically it. That's just like a high-level, hardware for software. If you build something or do something, share it. I love to see what people do. The more ridiculous, the better, in my opinion. Because, like I was saying before, some of these projects, they don't really have a point except to humor myself, and I'm easily humored. But there has been a couple of things. For example, my buddy Dave and I, we're going to be looking at doing some work for a museum now, just because they saw us posting, these random things. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, well, if they built that, could they take that and do this and this and this? And so, just constantly, if you're working on this stuff, put your work out there, because you'd be surprised what people will ask you to make or even do. So that's it. That's all I got. I feel like that cat.